what does what's happening in the administration mean for the country and mean going forward? So there's a couple of things happening right now. One is that, you've been hearing from me for a very long time that Trump is slipping mentally, that he's a loose cannon, all those things. I am not alone in this observation, I promise you. And the people who are watching him even more closely than I am are the people who want to inherit his political movement. So, one of the things that you can see happening right now are people starting to jockey to pick up those MAGA Republicans. Lots of debate about whether or not that's going to be possible. Lots of figures in the mix there. Lots of people trying to hide. I mean, look at J.D. Vance. He does not want to be associated with this Iran war. He doesn't want to not be associated with it either in case it turns out well. But he's not the face of this by any stretch of the imagination. The only person who is clinging to it is Pete Hegseth, who appears to have been very deeply involved in it. And according to something Trump said the other day, he said, Pete, this was your idea. Everybody else is kind of trying to back away because they all know he's gotten himself in over his head, and they don't want to be associated with it when it all goes bad, or if it all goes bad, as these oil prices go up. So you got people jockeying over taking over MAGA, the MAGA Republicans, but you also have people trying to figure out what to do about Trump. They know he's in trouble. They know that the country is in trouble with him there. He does things like go to war without telling anybody, right? So this struggle over Trump and over whether or not to defend him or whether not to defend him or what to do, you can see playing out in somewhat erratic performances by MAGA Republicans who are trying to pick up his people, not offend his people, get some distance from him, not get some distance from him. And, I get stuff frequently from people sending to me statements or interviews that Republicans have done going, what do you make of this? Because somebody who's very MAGA is kind of anti-Trump. So what's going on there is they're trying to figure out how to pick up his voters. But then there is also the very real problem of the fact that Trump and the MAGA Republicans are really unpopular. And so are all of Trump's policies. And you can see that this is the case because they're backing off on them. Before this 2026 election, all of a sudden, the Republicans are not talking about undocumented immigrants. They are trying to back off of the extraordinary violence of the administration under people like Greg Bavina, who's been pushed out of Border Patrol now. They've gotten rid of Corey Lewandowski. They've gotten rid of Kristi Noem. They're trying to look softer and gentler. I would urge you not to buy that for a freaking minute because Stephen Miller is still in the White House and Russell Vought is still over at the Office of Management and Budget, cutting everything he possibly can. But as they are trying to look more moderate, as they are trying to look more acceptable to the to voters in the United States, two things are going on. One, you have the MAGA base, which is I've talked about them recently. They're anti-democratic at this point. They just want power. They're doubling down on the idea of all the stuff that Trump went for. They're complaining that he didn't go far enough, and so they are now in the same bed as neo-Nazis. They've really gone all white nationalist. Some of the extremists are talking about taking away the right of women to vote and so on. So you got that kernel moving off. But then you also have a lot of Republicans, including those who are not necessarily full-blown MAGA, although at this point you have to call all of them MAGA supporters, deciding that the only possible chance they have of winning the election in 2026 is by suppressing the vote, by making sure Democrats can't vote. And their solution to that right now is the Save America Act. And you've all asked me a great deal about that. Now, let me walk you through a little bit of what's going on with that act because it is now tangled up. Honestly, so much in this administration, like it's all like a big ball of wire, but it's now tangled up in the Department of Homeland Security funding. So let me explain that pretty quickly. As you know, the Democrats refused to fund the appropriations bill for the Department of Homeland Security for 2026. Like there are 12 appropriations bills. They passed 11, but they said we're not going to fund the Department of Homeland Security until you clean up ICE and Border Patrol. ICE is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Border Patrol is one of the other agencies under the Department of Homeland Security that was responsible for the shooting, for example, of Renee Good and Alex Peretti in Minneapolis. So they said, we're not going to fund that, but we are happy to fund everything else in DHS, and then we can negotiate over what you're going to do to clean up ICE and Border Patrol. And the Republicans, pushed by Trump, said, no, you're going to fund it all just the way we want it. And that's the only way it's going to be. So that's where things have sat now for more than a month. And that's why the Transportation TSA, Transportation Safety Administration, I think it's safety. Sorry, too many acronyms in my head. That's why TSA has not been paid. ICE is getting paid, and ICE is getting paid because what's at stake in the DHS budget is only this year's appropriations for ICE. In fact, in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act of July 2025, the Republicans gave a huge sum of money to ICE. I think it's $85 billion to ICE. So they actually have plenty of money, but they want more money for their operating budget. So the Republicans have said, no, we're not going to fund TSA. We're not going to fund the Coast Guard. We're not going to fund these other aspects of the government under DHS unless you just do what we say. And the Democrats said, not happening. So Sunday night, Trump came out and he said that he would not support any kind of a deal with the Democrats to fund DHS unless it also included the SAVE Act. Okay, so what's happening with that? The issue here is that, and this is complicated, and I'm sorry. I hope I can make it simple enough. The issue is that, as you know, the House has a rule to force people to stop talking. And because of that, you can pass something in the House with a simple majority. The Senate does not have a rule to make people stop talking. So the only way you can force them to stop talking is through a motion called cloture, which you need to have 60 votes to make happen. So if somebody says, I'm not going to stop talking, that's known as a filibuster. So effectively what that means is that in the Senate, if you want to pass a law, you have to get 60 people to vote for it. And it's actually Mitch McConnell, the former Senate Majority Leader, who weaponized this. It was rarely used until he decided to use it to stop the Democrats from accomplishing anything. But in this case, it's working in the Democrats' favor because they're saying, no, we're just not going to do this. We're not going to let you fund the DHS because you need our approval. And we're not going to let you push this SAVE Act through because the SAVE Act calls for requiring people to produce evidence of their citizenship, both to register to vote and to vote. There are two versions of the SAVE Act. One has passed the House. This is the version that is currently before the Senate. Okay, so you're seeing a lot of stuff out there. I'm describing the two of them. And just to be clear, the Republicans are out there. I saw an advertisement from Susan Collins just today, because I'm in Maine, saying Susan Collins believes everybody should have ID to vote. Well, I'm sorry, but in Maine, we would say, I apologize, no shit, Sherlock. You can't register to vote without identification. The question here is, does your identification have to be proof of citizenship? Your driver's license is not proof of citizenship. Your student ID is not proof of citizenship. Your hunter's license is not proof of citizenship. I could go on these lists. The things that prove your citizenship are your birth certificate, which has to have your name on it the way it appears today, and a passport, both of which take a long time to get and are very expensive. So that's what the SAVE Act would do. And it would stop mail-in voting, and except in certain circumstances. And all of a sudden, Trump wants to add to it different attacks on transgender Americans. And by the way, the last statistics I saw said transgender Americans are about 1.6 million transgender Americans in the country. And you can sort of assume that they're probably going to be primarily Democratic voters. So right there, you will just have knocked, more than 1 million voters off the rolls. And the Brennan Center, which follows all this stuff and is crackerjack good, estimates that about 21 million Americans will not be able to prove their citizenship. So you're going to knock them off the rolls. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of Republicans don't want the SAVE Act because there's no guarantee it's not going to knock Republicans off the polls too. That's a different story. which I would love to go into sometime because there's a really interesting backstory to it. But I'm already over time, so I'm not going to give it to you now. All right. So Trump says, I'm not going to sign off on anything. And meanwhile, the TSA lines, of course, are through the hours long in the big city airports. And he's not going to sign anything until he gets that SAVE Act. So what was on the table this afternoon, and I don't know how it's come out because I'm recording while it's being discussed, is the Republicans have apparently agreed to give the Democrats in the Senate everything they asked for. That is, they will fund just the other pieces of DHS, the Coast Guard, the TSA, the other pieces there, not ICE. That'll go back on the table, because what the Senate can do is, and this is where it gets complicated, almost, not everything, but almost everything in the Senate can be filibustered, except judicial appointments. That's a different story. And a very few kinds of revenue measures, financial measures. One of those is called budget reconciliation. And it's under budget reconciliation that the Republicans passed that One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which had everything, including the kitchen sink in it. What they are now saying is they will just simply fund ICE under budget reconciliation, because budget reconciliation cannot be filibustered, and therefore Republicans can pass it with a simple majority, and they've got it. They're also suggesting they will put the SAVE Act in budget reconciliation. Now, by law, you're not supposed to do that. Budget reconciliation measures can only be related to the budget, but that so far has not stopped the Republicans. Certainly, they had a ton of stuff in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that was not budget related, or at least that affected things differently than the budget. Although I have no doubt that if they try to do that, the lawsuits will be there within minutes of that happening. So what they're trying to do is to kick off the voting rolls, those who disagree with the Republican Party. All right, so where does that leave us in this moment? Because I said I was going to leave you with some of the, some things that I hoped would help you wrap up what's happening here and give you some things to do going forward. So first of all, what we have is a profoundly unstable president who has started a war that he can't, has just simply blown up in everybody's faces around the world. And he's got a lot of other problems as well, as those people around him are recognizing that he is increasingly weak and increasingly unstable. And that's going to cause problems for the people around him. And, as more and more scrutiny comes into the administration, that's going to weaken Trump more and more. And yet it's also going to mean that both he and Republicans who recognize how weak they are going to try to pass the SAVE Act, and also to convince Americans that the vote is not secure. And you've seen this right now in Georgia, where the FBI and under the director of the National Intelligence, it was weird that she was there, grabbed a whole bunch of ballots from Fulton County. And now we've seen the same thing, the same playbook happening in California, where somebody who is running to become the Republican governor of California, a sheriff now in Riverside County, has grabbed hold of 650,000 ballots, claiming that they were improperly counted, and his people are going to count them, which is, got everybody's hair on fire, because this is basically trying to undermine support for the idea that a Democratic proposition could win. This was votes for Proposition 50, the idea of redistricting California after Texas redistricted. And in fact, that proposition won by a whole lot of votes. And the people who did the counting of the votes say that these accusations are just completely out to lunch. And of course, the people who are saying that are the ones who are qualified to tell us how the system works. So you're seeing this idea of trying to undermine voting.